Brad, one of my favorite things to do with my kids is they love to hear embarrassing stories from my youth, you know?
Oh,
and,
yeah.
So I had a legit...
By the way, I'm right there with them. I love to hear embarrassing stories about your youth.
So we were talking last night at dinner, and I told him the story. I don't know if I've ever told you the story. So I was really fast when I was young, both in baseball and football. I was really fast. And my football league, I grew up in Southern California, in San Diego County, and my football league had a large number of Samoan guys that played. Like Junior Seau, later of the Chargers, was in my league.
Really?
And so if you know how I'm built, I'm not a hugely built guy, but I was fast as lightning. Yeah. But it would be me as a running back running into a really nice but gigantic Samoan guy, and they would, you know, crush me like a thing. Anyway, during one of these games, I tore off one of my quadricep muscles on my right leg. Literally tore it off. I only have a tricep on that leg now. I lost a lot of speed. And it took me like...
Yeah. They just took it right off. They couldn't reattach it. It's gone.
I don't know. Did they talk about this? There was a surgery that they talked about, but they're like, it's not really worth it. It won't be much better than the functioning tricep you'll have. Anyway, long story short, I was in therapy for a long time getting it worked on. But the first week back at high school, I'm like limping through my day on crutches. And I'm like, I need to use the restroom. So I go into the restroom, like lean the crutches in the little cubicle there, you know, and the pants come down, and I go to sit down. And Brad, my newly tricep, there was a key moment in sitting where the leg would fail.
Oh, no.
And I would fall sideways, right? So I need you to know that my pants are around my ankles. My leg suddenly gives out. And in high schools, they have these all-steel toilet roll holders to the right of you.
Oh, yeah.
My head squarely hits the all-steel, and I'm out cold. I'm out cold with my pants down around my ankle.
Oh, Jesus. In high school, where you will find nobody willing to give you any help. This is the worst place to have your pants down.
And you know that if any help comes, it's going to come after 19 pranks have been pulled on you before they help you. Like, well, he seems to be unconscious. Now's the perfect time to write wiener on his forehead.
Yes. Or forehead on his wiener.
I didn't see that joke coming.
That's an 8-character word. That's pretty good. It took you a second. You counted them out, didn't you?
And thankfully, it was a medium-sized Sharpie. So you know what? It's all right. No complaints anywhere.
It wasn't one of those fine points.
It wasn't those fine calligraphy pens, you know. Anyway, so apparently I was out cold, and people were like, my feet were sticking out of the cubicle, whatever you call it. Yeah. And so all my football buddies are like, Dave, and they dragged me out. Like, imagine being 18 and you've got to pull your friend out of the bathroom.
Oh, no.
And so they bring me into the nurse. But I got to tell you, Brad, there is nothing more merciless than a high school joke crowd about when you're having to be pulled out of a bathroom with your pants down with a big, like, welly on your forehead or whatever they call them, you know?
There's one thing worse than being pulled out by your friends, and that is being pulled out by your friends after the age of iPhones when everybody's got a camera right there in their hand.
God.
Could you imagine what the social media we'd see?
I would have been on TikTok in a hot second.
Yeah.
All I would have asked is they would have put the sparkle filter on. That's all. And on that note, I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to ComicLab, the show about making comics
and making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his pal Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. So we've got a bunch of really fun questions to jump into for this week. And the first one comes into us from Craig over on patreon.com/comiclab. And I'll read this one to you. It goes, "Hi, guys. Hope you're well. I was wondering if you could give me some advice on how to break my story down into chapters and issues. Generally, I use a story structure somewhere between Dan Harmon's story circle and K.M. Whelan's character arc. I found both these resources really useful for plotting out my overarching story. However, when it comes to breaking that story down into manageable and publishable chunks, I struggle to make each chunk stand on its own 2 feet, so to speak. Boy, do I know about having trouble standing on your own 2 feet. Yeah. So I guess I'm asking 2 questions here. 1, how do I choose my chapter breaks? And 2, how do I structure each individual chapter issue? All right. Thanks in advance for your feedback. Take care, Craig. So, Brad, I can think of no better person than you, actually far better than me, to answer this question. So do you want to tackle Craig's question for us?
Yeah. I'm good. Now, from my standpoint, my feeling is that you're going about this backwards, okay? Now, I'm going to put an instant asterisk up there and say everybody writes differently, and maybe this way is the way that your mind is set up and you're going to work, and that's fine. But I'll talk to you about how I do it, and maybe that will give you some stuff that you can use from. Because what it sounds like is you're writing a whole bunch of stuff, and then you're trying to divide it into story beats. And I'm going to encourage you to do it a different way. And here's what I'm talking about. And I talked about this just recently on the Discord server and got a little pushback. As a matter of fact, when I said, when I write, I think of my chapters as 22-page chapters, and I write to 22 pages. Okay. And there was a lot of pushback from people said, no, you got to write as many pages as it takes. And I said, no. Because that's how, and by the way, I know this because I spent years writing that way. And the result was a bunch of meandering storylines that went all over the place and took forks in the road and went way over here. And at the end of the day meant nothing. But I was having a great time, but my readers couldn't stand it. And when I finally realized that what I needed was organization. And what that meant for me was to write to a 22-page chapter. Now, I've talked about this in the past, but it's been years since I talked about this. So I'm going to readdress it, and I'll see if I can do a link. And I think I've talked about this on webcomics.com too. I'll see if there's a public access version of that. But I found a sitcom template a while back that broke down a sitcom that, and it was, by the way, a 22-minute sitcom. It broke it down into things that happen at every minute mark for a typical sitcom with an A-B storyline, right? That's where you've got a main storyline, and then every now and again you got a B story that comes out and plays for a little bit, and then you go back to the main storyline, and then the B comes out, and then back and forth until you're at the end.
Right.
What I realized was 22 minutes relates perfectly to 22 pages. And if I use this sitcom template for me, it helped me to, basically it said, the first 3 minutes, you introduce the story. Okay, I can do, that's 3 pages. That's plenty of pages. On the 4th page, the protagonist is identified with a goal that they want to get, or a want or a need that they want to get. By page 5, they're blocked. And then it just goes through and says all the things that happen in a sitcom that hit these minute marks regularly. By the way, does it mean that I've stayed to that slavishly? No, absolutely not. I give myself room to wiggle in there, but that's not the point. The point is I'm organized. I know what's happening when. So now I can go to Dave Harmon's Story Circle and see how that plays out across those 22 minutes. Or if I want to break that story circle into 3 chapters, which also happens, I can see how far I've got to go to get to the first third of the story wheel, then the second third, then 3/3. And I can plan all this stuff out. So then what I'm done with, I'll go through and say, okay, I've got, and we talked about this recently when we talked about writing, I know a certain thing is going to happen. I don't know what it's going to be yet, and I don't have to write it yet, but I know the beat, and I know where it fits in everything. And then I can write very, very good stuff. I know everything's going to line up. I know where everything is, and I can plan my story out. What do you think, Dave? Do you think that might be something that could be usable?
For Craig, absolutely, yeah. Especially if Craig is asking this question, I think structure like the one you've just laid out is actually a useful approach. I don't write that way.
Yeah.
And I don't, but I'm not, that's not me poo-pooing the way you do it. That's just me
Don't
saying
poo-poo with what I'm doing.
Yeah. I'm just saying I don't write that way.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit more like Moonchild in a Vanagon driving around the U.S. going, hey, man, we're gonna camp here for the night, brother. It's fine. You know, it's good. We're good, man.
I'm feeling the vibrations from these trees, man. I think this is the place we're meant to be, brother.
I'm going to walk into town and trade this poem for some apples. That's what I'm going to do, brother. All right, so what I mean is I'm a little bit more loosey-goosey, and I write to what I feel. And then the second thing I should mention is for Drive, I don't write in a chapter structure. And so that makes it particularly unhelpful for me to chime in. But I will say this. The one lesson that I learned from reading and rereading Tolkien and Frank Herbert a lot is when I get to something that is a build, and normally you would bring it to completion and then switch stories. I build, tease the completion, switch stories. And then go to the next one, build, tease the completion, and then switch back to that story, and then find completion, and then begin the next arc of that story. Does that make sense, Brad? So I don't give satisfaction of like, oh, that chapter is now done. I give you just enough to make you go, wait, I want to go back to, no, don't switch stories. And I can see it driving my readers nuts in the same way that the first time that I read through Lord of the Rings, it drove me nuts. I'm like, wait, tell me more about how Gandalf became Gandalf the White. No, don't switch to Gondor. God damn it, don't switch to Gondor. Go back to Gandalf. I want to know about it. How did he become the White? Yeah. And so that technique of like build, tease just enough so that you're like, wait, what's going on? And then you switch storylines. I found that has been my indicator that it's time to switch what some people would term a chapter, go to the next one. So even though structure doesn't work for me, I'm a little bit more feel it out as you go. I think for Craig asking this question, it sounds like he wants the structure that you're providing him.
I'm gonna advocate just a little bit on behalf of this, and I'm gonna speak directly to Craig for a second. Here's why I want you to give this a try, because right now you're like, well, Dave said it's okay. I'm going to keep with what I'm doing, and not making a statement about you, Craig, but it's always more comfortable to stay with what you're comfortable with than to branch out, do new things. I'm going to advocate just for a second on this, because doing it my way, remember how I'm always arguing that you need to make something happen on every page, especially if you want to build an audience on the web. You have to have something happen on every page. This is how you do it. Because when
with that
instead
22-page structure
trying
that you're
to
talking
break
about,
a huge chapter down into story beats, and there might not be natural something happened to your moments in that chapter the way you wrote it. But what I'm basically doing is each one of those 22 pages are 22 story beats. So when I write a page, I'm already thinking something's got to happen here. How am I going to make it happen? And Dave, we've had private phone conversations all the time where I'm like, just this weekend.
Those are between you and me, Bradley. Don't you reveal our private phone conversations.
But like just this weekend, I called you and I said, I need something here. I did the storytelling part in the first 4 panels. Now I need something here to make something happen. That's what that conversation was all about. I knew what the storytelling part was. I still hadn't made something happen, and I needed to do that. That's what I'm going to advocate for, because this is all about making something happen.
So I want to jump back in to say, Craig, that even though I am more loosey-goosey, remember that I'm more like Moonchild rolling into town in my old Volkswagen. But remember that Moonchild doesn't have matching socks and maybe doesn't have a bank account and will never have a retirement account planning. Like Moonchild is more, I don't necessarily advocate the way I do it is what I'm saying, Brad. Does that make sense? Like I'm just saying it is the way that I have stumbled as a writer into a process that works. I will say that my two sort of North Stars of switch storylines when you've teased the good stuff that the build has been building up to. So that's number 1. And 2, make every page have a satisfying or interesting, completion. Those two things make it so that people come back and make it so that the chapter hums along.
Mhm.
And so even though I am not as structured as Brad, I think that at least has been my stumbling half-ass way to do it. So I personally, though, would say, Craig, better to learn from Brad, who I have always admired for his structure and his ability to lay out how he's going to do things versus my more moonchild way of being like, you know what? If the moon is in Sagittarius, then I'm going to have the characters do this, brother. It's going to be great.
Yeah. And if you're interested in seeing, it's hard to do this just without any visuals. I went through and I broke this all down on the Discord server just a few days ago. And you'll have to do a search to see if you can find it. But it's also on webcomics.com where I did a post complete with pages out of my sketchbook and pages out of Evil Ink to show you how I got there. If you're interested in learning more about that, either check out the Discord server, and it's also available on webcomics.com, because this is something I feel strongly about. It's starting with this structure, I think, is going to make your story better.
Well, I'll tell you what I'm feeling strongly about. I'm watching you on the screen, and this new haircut, I got to tell you, Reed Richards, it's looking sharp as you lead the Fantastic Four into battle.
Look at that Reed Richards bit I've got right there. I've wanted this for years.
I've been so used for the last 6 to 12 months of you looking like Grandpa Munster with the crazy hair in quarantine that now I see what your wife saw all those years ago, Brad. Suddenly it's all coming clear that, like, at first I was like, what did she do? What horrible mistake did she make? And now it's all coming clear.
I do feel better with the haircut. I do feel better with it. It was a long time in coming.
It was a long walk.
Yeah. Well, listen, Dave.
Well, you're looking sharp.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, as much as I'd love to talk about my hair, I want to switch. And I want to come around to a question we got from another $5 Patreon backer.
Sure.
This comes in from Oxfordinary, who says, hello there, fellow enthusiasts of the stripped comic. I work with traditional art, but have been facing a constant problem that seems so elementary, I feel dumb for asking. When penciling my comics, I'm usually using a 2H pencil for sketching. After inking, I erase with a kneaded eraser, but quite often the lines persist. After even multiple attempts, I usually resort to doing more extra cleaning digitally as I scan in color, because I also color my comics with paints, markers, and colored pencils, but there's usually so much little bits all over the place, I get fed up and don't even bother, and I just go for the big parts. I do my best not to push down with the pencil, and I try not to press hard on the eraser. But this problem also tends to persist when I use lighter or darker colored pencils and all kinds of paper. If you two have any advice that might help me with my situation, it would be greatly appreciated. And also, this person says, only after I made something a little special did I find out I couldn't send it to you. So, Dave, this person made a special comic. I think you can see it in the to-do section, but they put a special comic together for us. I will put that with permission on the post on ComicLab, but thank you very much. We were very honored by a special ComicLab comic strip by this wonderful creator.
That's fantastic. Well, I got a lot of words to say about erasers. I got big feelings, Brad.
You got feelings for erasers?
Well, I got it's like a little kid. They come into a room, just barrel it in. Like, I got big feelings about whatever is going on. So I will say this: there is a dance between eraser, pencil, and paper. And so the first thing that I will say is buy and use good paper. Yeah. I use Bristol vellum paper. And I use smooth, but you could use, I forget what the other term is, but there's a different kind of Bristol vellum. But anyway, Bristol vellum is an acid-free paper that, if you buy the right one, and it has enough strength and sturdiness that it can hold the ink and not lose the ink when you erase over it, right? But now I will say, the pencils that you're using, sometimes you can use too soft a pencil. And so if you're willing to go a little harder, it's a little bit easier to erase. But here is the big takeaway, is that there is no worse thing on God's green earth than a kneaded eraser. It's like trying to erase with wet spaghetti noodles. It's the worst thing ever. It doesn't work. It gets messy. Whatever it lifts, it smudges just as much. It's just a piece of shit as an eraser. I hate kneaded erasers. I don't know how you feel about them, Brad. I've got big feelings about kneaded erasers. I feel like kneaded erasers are what like 14th century artists figured out how to make when nothing else was available. They're like, a guy will walk in from another town in Italy and be like, I just figured out an eraser. It's called a kneaded eraser. It's all we've got. It's the 14th century. Let's use this. And everyone's like, all right, yeah, that's fine. So there's basically 4 types of erasers. There's the kneaded eraser, which is God's gift to bad's erasing. There's the gum eraser, which I don't know how to describe it other than to say it feels like an eraser that was developed in the 1930s or 40s. Like before they had plastic, when they had Bakelite, Brad, and they're like, Bakelite, that's the new way to make things. And then I feel like gum eraser, I'm sure it's much older, but it feels like it came around in the 1930s. It's a piece of shit. I hate gum erasers too. Yeah. Pink erasers, which is the ones we all know from school, you would use them with a standard 2 pencil. And they're okay, but they're not great. But here's what you want. Am I going to put a big line in the sand and say you want to buy a vinyl eraser. Specifically, if you can buy a vinyl eraser by any one of the Japanese manga supply companies, there's a specific triangle one that's very hard to find, but God, is it good in your hand. And the triangle means you always have an edge to erase with. And so I will highly advocate for any type of vinyl eraser, but especially the ones from Japanese companies and some German companies. The German companies really do them well too. That's what you want to go with. God, get rid of the kneaded. Throw the kneaded eraser at passing strangers. You get rid of them. You don't want them. Brad, did I come on too strong about kneaded erasers?
I'm not going to say you came on too strong, but I am going to advocate a completely different solution to this problem.
If you're going to say digital, I'm going to reach through that screen and punch you in the nose.
No, okay. It's not digital. It's not digital. I think you should be using a light box. I think you're spending way too much time erasing that you could be spending drawing. And light boxes, as you pointed out to me, because I totally upped my light box game. Now with LED lights, they're so cheap. I bought one for like $20 or $30. That works beautifully. I don't think you should be erasing at all. I think you should be doing your penciling on whatever paper you've got around. Then bring a nice piece of paper over, lay it over top with a light box, and do your inking right over that, and then do your coloring, and then scan it in. And I think you're going to get a much better product.
You know what? As much as I went on a big diatribe and dove off the deep end about kneaded erasers, I'm going to immediately hitch my wagon to Brad Geiger and say yes. And I'll tell you why, because I'm not going to take credit for some great innovation. I stole this from Meredith Gran of Octopus Pie. Who, when I went to her studio, she was doing Octopus Pie where she would draw it digitally, or sketch it rather digitally, with all the advantages of digital, moving characters around, reducing them in size, flipping them horizontally or vertically, or you know what I mean? Changing out different props, also having pre-saved backgrounds ready to go that you can adjust and modify, right? She would get all that ready in Octopus Pie. She would print it out. She would light box it. So you get all the advantages of a Meredith Gran inked page. And I'm watching this going, holy shit, Meredith, I've wasted the last 15 years or whatever it was cartooning. I'm going to start doing it that way. And so that's now how I do Sheldon. And so very rarely do I actually put a pencil now to my comic page. It's all light boxed from a templated comic strip that then has drawn and sketched images on it. So Brad, yes, that is a great point. And I don't know why I had completely forgotten that.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, you told me that a little while ago, and that's now how, if I do an inked commission, for example, for a Kickstarter, or somebody buys a commission, they want it inked, that's how I do that. That's how I do all my artist edition book plates, because I'm much more comfortable penciling digitally now that I've converted 100% to digitaling. I'll print that out, light box it, bring it out, bring the inking markers out, and pop that baby out so much quicker, so much better, and I do a much better job. than I did before. So I
Yes.
co-sign that 100%.
Yeah, because the balance of your composition is improved. Like if I draw somebody, Brad, in pencil, and then I get the voice bubble, and it's close enough. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
I will just leave it in pencil. But in digital, if I could reduce it 10%, but it becomes massively better, it takes 2 seconds. Why wouldn't you do it in digital? So yes, you actually get a better composition, a better layout, a better flow for the comic when you do the layout and penciling digitally printed out. And so I think actually that's the button we can put on that one, which is, dear God, feed the kneaded eraser to a wild dog. I don't know what that sounds like, animal cruelty. No, don't do that. Just get rid of the kneaded erasers. Go to vinyl, but also do your penciling and layout digitally, and do a light boxed inking process. And I think you will be good to go. Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics.
So, Dave, let's go to another $5 Patreon question. And this comes in from Ryan, and it kind of has a theme from the top of the show involving injury. Although, as far as I know, Ryan did not get pantsed by his buddies in high school. Ryan says,
Ryan is actively like, don't involve me in any of this.
Yeah, don't get me involved in this.
Put that Sharpie down.
It sounds like it might be a good deal more painful than that. Ryan says, about 5 years ago, I sustained a back injury that has changed how I approach pretty much everything in my daily life. I'm currently dependent on both painkillers and muscle relaxers to achieve any sense of normalcy. I bring that up because I'm trying to follow the advice of write what you know with the graphic novel I'm working on. The idea is to have one of the leads suffer through a chronic injury that requires similar medications. Generally speaking, when I've seen the topic of meds addressed in comics, it's always to address addiction or abuse. This wouldn't be that. Instead, imagine needing to use an inhaler at least once a day because your body fails to breathe normally.
I can imagine that. As an asthmatic, actively reaching for my inhaler. No, but go ahead.
Yeah, it's how that alters a character's mindset and motivations I'm hoping to capture. Anyway, my question is, will the use or the theme of drugs hurt my comic moving forward? Will it address my performance on Kickstarter or affect the performance? Will it hurt my ability to be in bookstores? Heck, would it be something I have to address to people considering picking it up at comic conventions? You two gentlemen have been a constant source of inspiration and advice for 15 years now. Thank you for reminding us that we're old. No, seriously, that's very kind. Thank you. After wrestling with this for months, I would love your thoughts. So, Dave, give Ryan some advice here. He wants to bring his real life into his comic, talk about this chronic injury and the medications that are helping him achieve some sense of normal. But is that going to hurt him down the line?
Well, first of all, Ryan, on a basic human level, I'm sorry that you are living this moment and have to put up with that. Back pain, I know from my own small hiccups of back pain, what a incredible piece of shit the human back is, and from a design standpoint. And I'm sorry that you're living with that. Secondly, I think big picture for this is, we do always say, write what you know. And the kind of beautiful thing about the internet and a fragmented audience across many different interests and types and genres is that if you write what you know with love, with passion, with great interest, making it entertaining, making it captivating, in a lot of cases making it fun and funny, and in this case it wouldn't necessarily. But humanity, I think, bringing forth the humanity in a captivating way. I think you will find that the world is far more welcoming than you think towards an experience that a lot of people have to go through, which is chronic pain or a chronic medical condition, more broadly speaking, right? And so I remember, just as my own reference point, when Kate Beaton started doing comics about history, having grown up in the newspaper era where things were much broader, Brad, like painted with a broader brush of like,
broad.
Yeah. Like you've got to write for the 80-year-old woman and the 5-year-old kid, and the same comic has to appeal to both. Well,
yeah, but somehow that always included golf jokes. I never understood that. You got we're doing broad, but then every third Thursday is a golf joke. I never understood that.
It's true. I'm laughing because it's true. But yeah, so having grown up in a world where comics, from an editorial standpoint, they were always told, like, you've got to be broad, you got to appeal to everybody. It's a mass media. Kate Beaton's comic was one of the first to show me, like, no, write what you know, write what you love, make it good, and the audience will come. And so that's why we say, like, if you're into cosplaying 14th century outfits from Japan or China or Europe, if you write that comic and write it well, then there will be an audience for that of fashion interested people that are like, oh yeah, I love this idea, and I love this that you throw your passion into it. Brad, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I listen. You know what you're going to hear from me. Step one, do a good comic. Step two, everything follows step one. Right? If you do this and the way I think you're capable of, and you put this out and you put your heart into it, and you put your passion into it. And if you follow a lot of the stuff that we're talking about in terms of good storytelling, good comics, a lot of these things that we keep dropping back to on the show week after week, I think if you do a good comic, you can tell a story about anything, including something like chronic injuries and chronic pain, which might be something that you wouldn't think that somebody would be interested in reading. Like, who wants to read a book about pain? Well, if you write it well, anybody, because let's face it, we're all experiencing or going to experience some level of pain. Some of us are going to experience the kind of pain that you're talking about for the last 5 years, which is a lot more significant. Mm-hmm. I think there's a bigger audience than you think. I don't think, let me just categorically go through and wave away all your worries. It's not going to affect your Kickstarter. It's not going to affect your comic conventions. It's not going to affect you being in bookstores. It's not going to affect people wanting to read this comic. None of that's going to matter. What I want you to focus on right now is telling a good story, and just take all that other stuff, all those worries that might be deeper seated in your own discomfort of sharing about this. In other words, that's the other thing I want to talk about. When I see you say, what about Kickstarter? What about Comic Cons? What I'm hearing is, I'm not comfortable talking about this. Okay, not yet. I want to encourage you. You know what I mean? Yeah. When they'll throw up every reason in the world. I don't know about that. I don't know. What about my Kickstarter? What I'm hearing is you're not completely comfortable yet. That's something you've got to get to on your own. But if it helps to hear a couple of guys like Dave and I say, this isn't going to hurt your Kickstarter at all, as long as you tell a good story, then that's what we're going to tell you. Because it's the truth. None of that stuff's going to matter. Now you got to work on your comfort level with sharing this kind of thing, which is going to be deeply, deeply personal, and find the storytelling hook or hooks that are going to make this work for you.
Yeah, and I think when you, as far as the concerns that Brad waved away, as far as Kickstarter, I don't think it would have. Again, I don't think it would have any problem with that. I don't think it would hurt your ability to be in bookstores. In fact, I think that's the unique angle that this book would be sold under. I can see potentially small limitations on access to kids or people of a developmental age, just because they don't yet have the skill set to process how drugs under a doctor's supervision could be used effectively and carefully, and so That's but again, to Brad's point, you can imagine, and we do see now, thankfully, in the last 10, 15 years, comics about everything in terms of topics that people would not previously have written about, because it's cathartic for all of us as humans, not only to process our own pain, but to understand that as empathic creatures, we are not alone in being able to understand other people's pain, that we all walk a tricky road, and it's worth being sympathetic and understanding that some people have come from a very different background or walk a very different road. So I actively want to read stories that are markedly different than my own life. Wouldn't you say, Brad? Like that's part of the joy of seeing these voices that are unique starting to flourish online and through smaller publishing houses. Because you're not getting some standardized, generalized voice of, yes, here we are golfing again. You're getting real stories about what it means to function with depression, what it means to be a recovering alcoholic, what it means to be on the spectrum and going through life like that. All sorts of things like you can imagine. So, Ryan, I think there's absolute validity to bringing your story to the world. I actually look forward to reading it. And I think carefully done and with passion and with your love for the craft and interest in the topic, I think you can make a great comic out of this.
Yeah. I'm gonna wrap that up just by saying, Ryan's, get to work. We look forward to hearing from you. Check in with us at some point. Let us know how you're doing. But get to work. You got your work cut out for you, and you're going to do great. So, Dave, I'm going to bring us over to another question that I'm really interested to hear what you've got thoughts on. You ready for this?
Sure.
This comes in from Tyler, who says, each month I let my patrons vote on characters and themes of a 1 or 2 page comic. However, lately I've noticed less and less votes, fewer and fewer votes each month. I ask for feedback.
Goodness, listen to the English professor over here.
Fewer, please. I ask for feedback on why or what I could do differently, and I don't hear anything back. What do I do when my patron count is at my all-time high, but I'm not hearing much feedback on my work or their monthly benefits? Dave, he's at an all-time high on Patreon, but they're quiet. What's Tyler to do?
Oh boy, there's a lot of different angles to talk about this, but I will say this, as I want to speak first as a patron, right? Not as a cartoonist creator, but as a patron of other cartoonists or artists. Very often, the key and only signal that you need is that they are paying and that number is growing in terms of the volume of people that are growing, right? Because here's what I don't want to have to do as a patron. If I'm patronizing a musician or another cartoonist or a sculptor or a dancer, I don't want to be called out and be like, hey, you dance for my supper right now. You perform for me. It's like when I go to a show, I hate it when I have to get called up on stage or when like I have to interact with the comedian. I'm a little bit like, to hell with you. I'm paying to see you entertain me. Don't make me part of your show. Like that's my personality. But it's a little bit like how I feel as a patron. Like, don't make me sing for my supper. I'm paying you. You do the work, and I, as a patron, will enjoy what you create. Right? That's what I feel like. So for me, it's a version, Brad, of what you always say, which is pay attention to your readers. Don't necessarily pay attention to your reader. And in this case, the reader being Dave Kellett, who doesn't want to get involved. Like I just want to see what you create. Don't make me have to dance for it. Right? And so, what are your thoughts, Brad?
Well, you took all my best lines.
Oh shoot! I'm sorry.
Yeah, this is definitely a permutation of don't listen to a reader, listen to your readers. If you're at an all-time high on Patreon, your readers, plural, are saying you're doing great. Keep up the good work. And that's what you should be doing. But I'll give it one more twist. And this is something I want you to look at in terms of yourself. And I think a lot of us do this. And I am guilty of this absolutely, because my Patreon backers tend to be a little bit quiet. In other words, if any post I put on Patreon, out of 800 backers, if I get 12 people hitting the heart button and giving it the thumbs up, that's I watch for that. Once it passes 12, that's a really good post. Out of 800. Now you don't see me.
I will say though, Brad, that's a very unique psychology, I bet, to not suitable for work. And I'll tell you why. There's a subtle but consistent guilt across society about like, I don't want to chime in too much here. I don't want to call attention to myself. I just want to quietly enjoy this. Don't bring me into this. You know what I mean? I feel like that's part of it, don't you?
Yeah. Yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head, but I want to take this one step further. I think as creators, we always get into this grass is always greener for the other cartoonist kind of thing. In other words, we see the interactions that other people have. And again, we're comparing our documentary to somebody else's highlight reel. And it's like, oh, geez, when Dave posts on Drive, all these people are saying all these nice things, and it's all wonderful. And Dave must wake up and look at his phone and have 10 people saying what a great job he did waking up this morning. And then he pours a cup of coffee, and he's got 10 more readers telling him what a great job he did sipping coffee. And me, nobody's saying anything about how I'm sipping coffee, and nobody cares how I woke up. And I think we see other people, and let's face it, there are some creators who have a very dynamic, charged readership and audience, and that's great. In 20 years, I never had that. And I still kind of don't. I've got much more engagement from my readers than I used to, but it's also perfectly fine to do this poll and not get a whole lot of interaction. A lot of times, you also have to remember that some of your readers, like Dave kind of intimated, might be happy being passively sitting by the sidelines watching it. In other words, they don't want to interact with the poll that you're putting up, but they're happy that it's there and they get to kind of see who voted and how it's going to turn out. That's another way. It's a passive interaction, but it's one that's possible. I wouldn't let this psych you out in any way, shape, or form. If you're at an all-time high on Patreon, you're doing something right. Keep doing it. Keep doing those polls for the people who are enjoying them, and push forward.
Well, okay. So actually two other things I want to talk about. One is hedonic adaptation, and the other one is low self-esteem. Right. So let's tackle that second one first, because all of us as artists have that.
Great.
What?
hedonic expectations.
Adaptation.
This is going to be wonderful because it's based on hedonism, right?
Yeah, actually, the root is the same. Yes.
Well, then tell me about it.
Okay. Well, we'll do that one second. So the first one is low self-esteem. So I'm going to take a big swing and say that all of us as artists have a certain level of insecurity. Or else we would have been the social person that lit up the room, and we wouldn't have been drawing in the school library off to the corner by ourselves. You know what I mean? Yeah. That was Dave Kellett. I loved me. I'm going to be over here drawing Garfield. If anyone wants to come over and ask me what I'm drawing. I mean, listen, I'm perhaps revealing a little bit too much about me in middle school. But anyway, what I'm saying is we all have that insecure part of us, right? And it's even as adults, even as confident adults now, it's still there. And who among us doesn't want to be told what you're doing is great? I love everything. It's all sunshine and roses, right? So even though you have all the signs that people are loving what you're doing, which is they're literally cracking open their credit card and saying, here's some money every month. I really like what you're doing. Yes. The insecure part of you is like, yeah, that's nice. That's good. But how do you feel about my eyes? What's going on? You know, like that kind of thing. What I'm saying is there's a form of basic insecurity of like, I just want more people to say more nice things about me, you know? Yes. And so I get that. I understand that. I have that myself. It's the same kind of voice inside of us that can read 10 great emails that are like, everything is wonderful about what you're doing, Brad. I love everything. And then one email, it's like, hey, Brad, I wish you're kind of phoning it in lately. And your mind will focus on that one thing because the insecure part of you thinks that one's telling the truth, but the other 10 are telling lies, you know? Yeah. And so that's part of what's happening here, right? And then the second one is hedonic adaptation that Brad was making fun of. So this is a classic a phrase that's usually used to describe salaries. And we've talked about it on the show before. It means that once you get to a certain level of salary, any level of money above that, there is a brief spike in happiness, but that you return then to your baseline psychology within a pretty short amount of time. So, Brad, if you went from, who knows, $40,000 a year to suddenly making $80,000, right? You jump up twice. If $40,000 had been previously meeting all your basic needs, right? Jumping up to 80 will get you a huge spike in happiness, but for a brief time, and then you'll kind of return to the same Brad Geiger you were at 40,000, right? That's hedonic adaptation. And so what I'm getting at with that is you haven't noticed it, but you have reverted to a mean psychologically because all these people individually have joined your Patreon and pushed it up, 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 up. And yet your mind is going back to that first day that you lost Patreon of like, I wonder if people are going to like this. Do people like that? Yes, they like it. It's actively getting larger, you know? You've got way more money, but you have adapted psychologically back to where you were when you kind of started it. Don't you think, Brad?
Yeah. Nope, I think you're absolutely right. I think that's a great way to talk about this too, is that you've got to take a look at what's going on in here and fix that, because that's until you address that, it's going to color everything you see. And if you're listening out there, and there's probably a lot of us that fall into this boat, we've all got some work to do on that and kind of shuffle off that imposter syndrome and tell ourselves we're doing okay. You're doing okay when you're at an all-time high on Patreon.
Yeah, that's the kicker, is the all-time high. It is self-evident from a logical standpoint, which tells you that the problem is not logic, the problem is emotion in that case, you know. So I think that puts a button on that question. And so I'm going to move us along to the next question from Dave Lerner. And Dave writes in, hey, B&D, could you talk a bit about emphasis in dialogue? Bold or italics? All caps if your dialogue font uses lowercase? Should the emphasis... Boy, I could almost say lowercase there. Good job, Dave. Lowercase?
You became British there for a minute. Should I become lowercase?
I say, should you use lowercase when... How about bold or italics? I say, italics. Oh, italics sounds wonderful in British RP.
Yes, I'm sure it does.
Oh, all these fonts. Should the emphasized word be in a larger font size? What about using a special effect font for that individual word, perhaps colored in? And how often should a word even be emphasized? Silver Age comics, oh my God, used to bold sometimes as much as 2 or 3 words a sentence. Is that too much? Short answer, yes. Yes. Do you even need to emphasize words at all? So Brad, Dave says, thank you for reading this. I can't emphasize enough how much I enjoy your podcast. Thank you for that, Dave. And Brad, I'm going to turn this over to you because I'm going to say one word, Brad, and you tell me your thoughts on this. Pogo.
Oh, yes. Well, listen, I'm going to go back to Dave, our question asker. You can emphasize it enough. You just have to use a bold typeface. But I got nothing from you on that one. We're talking about emphasis and lettering. He can't emphasize it enough. You use a bold typeface. You just nothing out
Brad,
of that.
That sailed right over my head.
Well,
I might as well be knocked out cold in a bathroom stall for that joke. I'm sorry about that.
Well, okay. First of all, let's take a few of those. There was so much there. Here's one, and this actually came up on the ComicLab Patreon page when we were talking about lettering, and somebody chimed in and said, "I read my dialogue out loud, and then I bold the words that I emphasize." Yeah. And I went and I checked out his comic, and it's true. He's doing exactly what he's saying he's doing. And as a result, every third word is bolded because in a lot of people, and I don't know whether this is universal, but I know it's for sure in English, you tend to emphasize at least one word in every sentence. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you'd be talking in what we call monotone. And I say that English language because when I listen to or when I watch anime with my kids, sometimes we'll watch it with the Japanese language and subtitles. And that, to my ear, sounds a lot more staccato, and I don't hear as many emphasis.
I wonder if that's just because you don't speak Japanese. Because to me, maybe we're watching different anime. Because for me, 70% is screaming in anime that I watch. So maybe that's just because I'm watching.
Which anime are you watching?
I'm watching Attack on Titan. So like every third word is screamed in Attack on Titan.
But listen, don't do if you're. It is a good idea to speak your dialogue out loud, but you've got to throttle back, and I would say try to limit yourself. And what I want to tell this person is to try to limit yourself to maybe 3 bolds per page, or 3 bolds, or maybe 1 bold per strip. Because what happens is if you're bolding every other word, you're bolding none of the words, and all you got to do is prove it to yourself. Do your next comic page, your next comic strip, and just bold 3 words on that whole, and it'll be amazing to you. They're going to jump right out. And right now, they're not jumping out because every other word is bolded and it's hard to tell what's important. So I wanted to get that right off the bat. I know a lot of people tell you read your language out loud and stuff, and that's a good idea. But you've still got to make an editorial decision on what's really important on the page, because they're not all that important. Only maybe 3 words per page are really important enough to bold.
Right. And one of the reasons why I jokingly said Pogo at the end of that question that Dave had written was, for me, and I can't speak for everyone, but for me, Walt Kelly is one of the more egregious examples of, if every word is bolded or made special, then no word is made bold or made special. Like, I don't think I'm offending anyone if I say that Walt Kelly was inarguably one of the best drawn, with Pogo, one of the best drawn comic strips in the 20th century for America. But for the most part, has kind of fallen by the wayside. Not a lot of people will go back and like, I still love Pogo, got to cherish it, you know? Not in the way that people still 30 years later read Calvin and Hobbes, or 20 years, I don't know what we're at now. But
I don't want to think about it.
So anyway, Walt Kelly, go ahead. What was that laughter for?
I don't know where we're at as far as the time since Calvin and Hobbes, and I don't want to think about it because it'll just make me feel old.
I know. But I will say this. Honestly, pull up an image from, just type, Google Pogo Walt Kelly and Google that image and pull up any one. And every sentence will either have 1 cursive word, 2 bolds, an italic, a different font entirely. And so I think that gives us an in to talk about a couple of things, Dave, that you had asked in your question that Brad didn't cover that I would like to talk about. So should you ever use a special effect font within an otherwise body font sentence? My advice would be no. I feel like that's very weird. It's on rare occasions have I seen it done well, but I think it's more weird than anything else. What I would advise is, if you're going to use a special effect font, it's best used when it's 1 word, maybe 2. If you've got to use it for the complete sentence, not for, why are you smiling so much? What am I doing wrong?
I do this all the time. But I do it a little bit differently than you do it. But I didn't want to interrupt you. But keep going, and then I'm going to add a little caveat.
Mommy and Daddy can fight about this. I feel like I feel like for me, I'm speaking my truth, Brad. And if you want to,
but I didn't want to interrupt you because you're making a really good point, and I don't want to interrupt it.
So for me, a special effect font. Which, for those that don't know, there are body fonts that would basically be described as standard comic text fonts, right? That's the font, the bread and butter of what you're reading in a comic. And then special effects fonts are ones that have either a little electrical sparkle on it, or feel heavy and wet, or feel like they've just been cracked like a stone, right? You know the fonts that we're talking about, right? And so for those, I say, if you're going to use them individually and not within a body font, because it makes for a weird and kind of jarring experience, personally speaking. I would use them more on standalone phrases or standalone words. And then as far as your other question about whether should they be colored in, I would advise color only when it impacts the point that is being made in the statement. So, for example, if someone is feeling sick, right, and they're about to throw up, and you've got them with the bulged cheeks or something, if the font that they're talking in goes green, it's just a little zhuzh on top of things, right, to let them know that something. But I would use that so rarely that when you do use it, it has an impact, if that makes sense. Like, don't do that every page. Do that one every 200 pages, because that one's a special use. As far as bold or italics or alt caps, for me, bold or italics largely depends on which body font you're using. Some fonts, quite frankly, the italic looks better than the bold, or the bold looks better than the italic. So I'm fine with either one. Maybe Brad has a point that he likes better one or the other. But if you want to emphasize the 1 or 2 words that Brad say on a page, I think whichever one works better. But just maybe try to keep it consistent. Some people use italics, Brad, to indicate something that's uneasy or something that's not quite right, but they use bold for emphasis. You know what I mean? Like, the bold is the emphasis. The italics is either a point that's being made or a key fact that they're trying to get across, for that, to kind of draw your attention to that thing, even though it's not being emphasized. So that's one way to look at that. But I feel like I'm talking too much. Back to you, Brad. Go ahead. What did I do wrong in the Brad Geiger world?
Well, listen, so I'll take I'll take it in reverse. I'm not a big fan of italics in a dialogue font because most comic book or comic strip fonts are such that it's hard to discern the italics. It's easy to discern the bold.
True.
Sometimes
True.
it's hard to discern the italics. So if I'm going to use one of those faces for emphasis, I'm much more likely to use bold than italic. Now, here's where I was laughing. This idea of using a special effect font in a dialogue, I actually do that quite a bit. But I do it in a very special circumstance. Number one, I won't use one that is going to be hard to read at a smaller size, like a watery font or with splashes around it. You and I both are fans of, I think this one comes from comic book fonts. It's called Rat-a-tat-tat. Right?
Great font, yeah.
Do you remember that one?
Yeah.
I use that quite a bit, but here's what I'll do. I will use it at the end of a sentence in a word balloon, and I'll have it exploding out of the word balloon. And this is for a word that would be very, very loud, like somebody is screaming, "You did what?" Well, that what would be in rat-a-tat-tat and would literally explode out of the balloon. So it's half sound effect, half dialogue, if you want to think about it that way.
Yeah.
And frankly, if you want to go to evil-inc.com and look, all you got to do is go back through a few, because I do it fairly regularly because I kind of like the effect. But it is done in a very specific way in which it's kind of exploding out of the balloon. I don't know that I would suggest it in like if you had it and you just took if you had a standard dialogue inside of a word balloon and you just changed one of the words to rat-a-tat-tat inside of there or some other sound effect font, I think that would be horrible, because that font is not built to be played small. Yeah. That font is built to be large. So if you're going to use it, it's got to explode outside of the balloon.
So can I interject for 1 second to ask you a question? So you would say on the occasions where you do mix two fonts, to use them on shorter sentences where that one word can be made much more emphatic, much larger, and where it's almost like showing a change of emotion from the earlier parts of the sentence, right? Is that fair to say?
Without a doubt. Without a doubt, I would say that.
Okay, so now let me say this, because he had also asked about lowercase fonts. And I will say this, that there is a greater ease, and it's fairly universally acknowledged, in reading uppercase fonts, sans serif, in a comic strip. Or a comic strip or comics page. So you'll see Marvel, DC, Image, most comic strips all using the same kind of font. When I say same kind, within a family of fonts, right? It doesn't have to be the same body font, right? But I do think there are times when a lowercase font can be used really well. I think for a childish voice or a child's voice, where there are a few words, a lowercase font is helpful. Sometimes for a whisper, a lowercase font helps reinforce the whispering aspect of it. Sometimes for an insecure question or an insecure voice of like, I don't know if we should go there, that kind of thing. Lowercase kind of lets you know that the character in that moment is reverting to a childlike state, and so is kind of helpful. So I think the same way as a sound effect font, a lowercase can be used, and only when it helps reinforce the point of the sentence. Kind of like we talked about with color, don't you think, Brad?
Yeah, and I would just emphasize, and I know you see a lot of younger cartoonists, and you see a lot of cartoonists kind of drifting to this as they discover digital lettering. They'll be like, well, if I letter in all caps, it's going to feel like I'm yelling. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to use lowercase. I'm going to do upper and lower case. The problem is that's really hard to read. It's really hard to read in a comic, especially at that size that it's portrayed. And it also, now you've got ascenders and descenders bumping into each other. You've got a whole lot of typographic problems that you've got to overcome unless you want there to be serious issues with your readability. I know you think it's yelling when you dialogue in all caps, but the fact of the matter is there's a reason that that's been done for decades and decades. It started out because it was also easier to do it. You can't soft shoe that. but it's also easier to read. And
Yes.
remember, they're not going to read your comic if they can't read your comic. This is all about readability, and upper and lower case. I'm telling you, just look around at some comics that use it. It really slows you down. So I will use it, but only for emphasis. Like Dave said, if somebody all of a sudden speaks in a quiet voice, I'll use upper and lower in that instance, in that one little balloon that I'll break out. I'll do that, but I won't letter my whole comic in upper and lower because it's going to slow my readers down, and they're going to get bored with trying to struggle through a comic.
And I just want to underline one thing that Brad said that I don't think can be said enough, which is the ascenders and descenders, meaning the parts of a letter that drop down, like the P, the line down on a P or the line up on a lowercase d. Those are the ascenders and descenders. Yeah. And Brad makes a really good point. That makes your world miserable in terms of lettering, because you don't want them to connect. You don't want them to come close to one another. You don't want them to create tangencies. And so all of that, when you do use lowercase, you often find that you are hand coordinating where all these letters are going to fall, because you're trying to dance the ascenders and descenders around one another, you know?
And if you're not, you've got your lettering so spaced out on a default to make sure that the ascenders and the descenders don't crash. You've got your lettering so watered out that it's contributing to the difficulty of reading your comic.
Right. And I will say one other thing about lowercase that I have used super sparingly, like maybe only 2 or 3 times in 20 years of cartooning, but it's an effective trick. When someone gets hit on a head, or when someone gets, or when a particularly stupid character walks onto screen, using all lowercase without punctuation is an incredible way to reinforce that they're not quite all there. Hey, what are y'all doing? And it's all lowercase and there's no punctuation. It's just a nice way to imply that the brain function is not quite spinning up to full effect there. And so have fun with stuff like that on super rare occasions. But I think we can put a nail on this by saying body fonts are your friend for 99% of the lifting. Let the writing do the work rather than the emphasis. And then when you do, use it sparingly so that you don't become like Walpogo. And then to the differences that Brad and I might have on using 2 fonts, I think that's okay, because that's also stylistic choice. For Brad, it works for him. For me, it works to do it a different way, and that's okay. You'll find the magic that works for you. But I think we've laid out enough generalized ground rules where you're good to go.
Absolutely. Absolutely. As with all things, it's all about seasoning, and you don't want to over-season your comic.
Oh, wow. That's actually, I'm not joking. That's a really nice way to say it. You don't want to over-season it. Yes.
Yeah, because then it becomes about the seasoning instead of the comic. So, it just pull back a little bit. If you find yourself doing a whole lot, like if you're bolding at least one word in every other sentence, pull back. Give it a little bit less seasoning and let the other flavors show through.
I'll tell you what's perfect. I'll tell you what's perfectly seasoned. My friendship with you.
Yes.
You've seasoned it just enough today.
Every now and again, it gets a little bit salty, but aside from that. And with that, my friends, we're going to bring another show to a close. And that means I get to say, you've been listening to Comic Lab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been my delightful pal, Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com.
And my sugary sweet friend Dave Kellett, the co-director of Stripped and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
I like that I'm sugary sweet. That makes me feel like I'm King Candy from Wreck-It Ralph. Oh, yes, we're going over there, Ralph. That's fantastic. The Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net, and this episode was edited by the very talented Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love Comic Lab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode.
And Comic Lab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/comiclab. So we'll go ahead and say that twice, patreon.com/comiclab.
Hey, look at this. I just found Dave Kellett passed out in the stall. Let's give him a swirly. Looks like somebody beat us to it. No, his hair's always been like that.
You're not far off the mark, by the way. There was a brief period in my young life, I don't know what the hell I was thinking, where I had, what do they call it? Business in the front, party in the back. What is that thing called?
A mullet? A mullet? You had a mullet?
In Southern California, no less, I had a mullet. What the hell was I thinking? It's not like I grew up in the skits of Tennessee there. Why did I have a mullet?
You better learn how to surf if you're going to walk around with a haircut like that.